Shit, yeah. If everyone does it, they just slap whenever they get a new bass.
You're about to see the entire process of how I built this 5-string headless bass. It's a build for Ada Adams Tamatia, bassist of LAB, one of the biggest bands here in New Zealand. This build required about 300 hours of work to complete. I've added narration to explain what's going on, but as so much work is compressed into a short video, some details are left out. If you have any questions on the process, feel free to leave a comment.
Freaking awesome. Feels great.
Before work begins on the instrument, the design and from that templates need to be created. A line marking the center of the instrument is drawn, and around that all the elements are precisely laid out. Once these locations are known, the outline of the body and headstock can be created. This headless bass will flare out behind the nut to allow hanging on a wall or stand. Now the template can be cut out and brought to final shape. Wood for the neck is selected. After squaring up each piece, strips are cut, sanded and planed in preparation for gluing into a multi-laminate neck plank. This combination of maple, Wenge and Purpleheart will make for a very stiff and stable neck. The laminates are glued together, and the next day the neck plank is cleaned up and prepared for further work. The outline of the bass is marked, and the neck and body sections are cut and milled to the correct thickness for this stage of the build. This instrument will have what's called a Toneblock, in this case a layer of mahogany and ebony behind the through neck. After the Toneblock is glued on, the center line is marked on the front of the neck and the master template is attached. There are 4 holes drilled in the template, which now get drilled into the through neck. These are used to help line things up during various phases of the build. They are located in the area which will be routed out for the pickups. After drawing the outline and removing the template, excess wood can be cut off with a bandsaw. The template is reattached using the index holes and pins for alignment, and the neck is routed to shape. Next, the fretboard template is attached, and a step down is routed around the end of it. The remaining excess wood is removed with the bandsaw and mill. A step down is cut on the headstock, so the headpiece can sit at the correct height. An ebony veneer will go on the front of the headstock. This needs to be cut to fit perfectly around the end of the fretboard. After gluing on the headstock veneer, holes are drilled for the headpiece. next step is to cut slots for the truss rod and carbon fiber neck reinforcement. The neck is mounted in the vise on the milling machine. Then, the center line of the neck has to be precisely lined up with the movement of the table. Once the neck is lined up, slots for the truss rod and carbon fiber are cut. Carbon fiber is cut to length and epoxied into the slot. The slots were cut slightly deeper than the carbon fiber to allow a thin strip of maple to be glued on top. The truss rod is encased in a maple sleeve, which is glued into the bottom of the slot using hide glue.
But don't come a preaching what it says. You won't be the rainbow.
The truss rod gets a maple cap as well, and then another one is made to go over the adjustment nut. The purpose of these is to improve the glue joint for the fretboard and to keep the glue away from the truss rod. Now the neck is ready for the fretboard to be glued on. This piece of West African ebony will become the fretboard. It is trimmed down, leaving a piece from the end big enough to make the truss rod cover later. After bringing it to final thickness, the fretboard is mounted on a fret slotting template and the slots are cut. After removing wood to create the nut slot, the fretboard can be trimmed to its final shape. This fretboard will have rectangular Luminlay side markers. Pockets for these are marked and cut into the back using the milling machine. The Luminlay must be cut and shaped by hand to fit in the pockets. The fretboard is taped in place on the neck. In 3 frets across the length of the neck, holes are drilled through fret slots into the neckwood. Small nails are tapped in and cut off, leaving enough to keep the fretboard in place when gluing. Hide glue is used to attach the fretboard. The glue needs to be heated to become liquid and gels as it cools. In order to have enough open time to get the clamps on, the parts are preheated. After the glue dries, access to the truss rod and the pocket for the truss rod cover are cut on the mill. The cover is made of an offcut from past the end of the fretboard, as shown earlier in this video. Magnets are then glued in to hold the cover in place. The neck is mounted on the milling machine, angled so that the correct thickness taper can be cut. After cutting the neck taper, the fretboard radius is roughed in with 80 grit. Fretmarkers are marked and drilled, and the Luminlay is installed and sanded flush. The build will have the same neck profile as this base. In order to copy it, I make templates of the shape at the 1st and 12th frets. I then use these templates to mark out the cuts I will make into the rectangular neck. Cutting these facets will get me most of the way to the desired shape. For the first cuts, I saw and chiseled to the lines on each end of the neck. I then remove the wood in between with an angle grinder and a rasp. Facets 2 and 3 are removed with a rasp. The remaining peaks are rounded over and the neck is smoothed to final shape. Now, the volute can be carved. Next thing to do is prepare the stainless steel frets. They are cut from the roll and the tangs are nipped and filed. The fretboard radius is final sanded and then the frets are pressed in. Fret ends are cut and filed to a bevel. The base will have a 2-layer top made from quilted maple and walnut underneath. After resawing and drum sanding, the layers are glued together. Using a hand plane, the edges are prepared for joining. After gluing and cleanup, the outline of the top is marked and roughly cut out on the bandsaw. Holes are drilled to help align the top with the back. The area around the end of the fretboard is routed and chiseled to fit perfectly around it. This piece of ash will be used to make the wings of the body. Starting as a rough board, it first needs to be flattened and brought to the correct thickness. The wings are marked and cut. Gluing surfaces are planed, and then the wings are glued to the neck. Once the glue dries, the front and back of the wings are evened up with a through neck. Then, the body can be cut and routed. Channels are cut to allow the wires from the pickups, battery, and bridge ground to reach the controls. Weight relief is cut. Glue surfaces are cleaned up and the top can be glued on in the vacuum bag. All the air is pulled out, and atmospheric pressure creates the clamping force. The edges of the top are routed flush and rounded over, then all the holes for the hardware can be made. Jack, bridge, bridge ground, controls, pickup cavities and mounting holes, strap buttons, control cavity, and magnetic covers. Finally, the serial number can be stamped. Shielding paint is painted inside the pickup cavities. Lines are drawn and the carving begins. After final sanding the base, the logo is branded into the top. Masking tape is applied to protect during the finishing process. Stain is rubbed onto the bare wood. Because of the grain pattern, it soaks more deeply into certain parts. When the stain is sanded back, it remains darker in the areas where it soaked in deeper, creating the effect of highlighting the grain. This particular piece of maple used for the top has some spalted figuring and therefore some soft spots. Epoxy is soaked in to reinforce these areas. Sealer is sprayed on and sanded mostly level. This creates a good base for color and clear coats to go over. Three colors and a black burst are sprayed in multiple stages. The top will have a gloss clear coat and the rest satin. The transition area will be on the edge of the maple. The satin area is masked off and the gloss is sprayed. The next day, the gloss area is masked off and the satin sprayed. There is a slight ridge of finish on the transition, which is scraped and sanded. The rest of the satin is also sanded. The gloss on the bevel is masked off with soft edge tape. This will avoid a hard line of paint when the next coat is sprayed. One final flow coat of well-thinned satin clear is sprayed everywhere except the top. The tape comes off. Finish is cleaned from the fretboard edges, and the fret ends are softened. Next, the frets are leveled, crowned, and polished. The top is sanded completely level and then polished to a gloss. The fretboard is oiled, shielding applied, and the instrument is assembled. The strings go on. The base is set up. The nut gets finished and glued in. And the base is done.
Look at that, clean.